name is Andrews. I'm the Hierophant of the Church of Witchcraft. Essentially, like I was said earlier, and in all of these, I basically keep things on the rails so they don't get too far left field so we actually get some things accomplished. Seems to be working so far. We've been around since 2020 and we're still here, so that's a good sign at least. People keep showing up, so thank you also for viewing and being here in our sermon tonight. My general practice is celestial witchcraft. Witchcraft is a lot of various systems and traditions, so that is my general focus, but it is not the only kind of witchcraft that exists. Thank you to anybody who's watching this in the future on whatever platform that might be. Who knows? It will change because the internet is the internet. But apparently we have a lot of people that are starting to view these, and we really appreciate it because much of this information is something that broadly goes kind of under the radar. Things about ethics, morality, those kinds of things don't really get talked about in broader spectrum witchcraft conversation circles. Today, we're going to be talking about extranatural entities, which is a big fancy word, and it doesn't really make any sense because you would think that I would use the word supernatural. Knowing the order of our realities helps us make distinction and also provides our motivations. The question, the big one that a lot of people have asked themselves and always ask themselves, what is it that we're doing here? What's my purpose? Why is really the best question. Just why? Filter that through whatever question or matrix you want to. Why do I exist? Why am I here? Why do I have a job? Why do I practice witchcraft? Any number of whys. Those are the big questions, and these are fundamental to who we are as people, as practicing witches, and that can be really challenging to try and discern. And so figuring out what that distinction is and figuring out our motivations within that question helps us in our witchcraft and helps our communities as well, both internally and externally. Many religions have various answers to that question of why. I'm not going to go into every single one of them. That would be impossible. They vary greatly over time. They vary over region as to how they're answering that why. Some don't even bother answering why. I'm actually curious about if all of them actually attempt that because I think the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, I don't know if they actually try to answer their why. I think they just exist as a political sort of joke to kind of push things much like the Temple of Satan does. But I appreciate the Temple of Satan's worship a lot more and their mission a lot more than the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Part of our inquiry in our lives, part of just being human, is to grapple with this exact question. The meanings of our lives, the value in our lives, and what worth we have. It is endemic to humanity as it stands. And frankly, it's really hard to find those answers. Most of us go about this on our own, talk to friends, family, therapists, what have you. In the past and also in the present, churches are one of those places that offer some of that guidance. They attempt to answer these questions. They try to give some sort of framework of morals and values. Now, much of that has been perverted in terms of its importance or what it originally meant or what they were trying to do because it's been around for so long that the game of telephone is so long that they lose sight of what it was originally or use it for their own ends. It's humanity. That is what some of this comes with. And I know that after I expire, theoretically many decades from now, that my mission, my words are probably also going to get similarly conflated. I'm okay with that. Religion has to change, evolve, and adapt with what the system is, with what society is present. There are approaches to deities in almost in all religions, nearly all of them. They can be monotheistic or polytheistic. There are also those that are non-deistic, that have no gods whatsoever. And I specify that because atheism is along the same lines, but it's about specific beliefs, whereas non-deistic just implements the idea that there's just no deities of any kind. Many witches will hold various concepts of what that might mean for them. And whether they're monotheistic, polytheistic, or any number of different amalgamations of kinds of belief that they have. But we're kind of left fluttering in the wind because we don't actually have really that solid core that says what it is we're going to do or what group is going to say that. I specifically am going to tell you right now, the Church of Witchcraft is not going to tell you exactly what to do, but we are going to focus primarily on helping you answer that question for yourself and offering ideas as a foil to what you might be experiencing and helping you sort through your own answers to your beliefs and your faith. Continuing that, we use the term extranatural beings. Frankly, I'm mostly the one that uses that. Maybe that will filter out. It's very fascinating when people preach my own sermons back at me and hold me accountable. So please do, because I find that fascinating. And it's very telling, especially when they yell at me about, not taking care of the first altar. That happens very frequently, unfortunately. So, extranatural beings, what does extranatural even mean? It refers to anything not of our realm. So, extranatural, not this realm, basically. An entity encapsulates all iterations of extranatural beings. So we have extranaturals, just not of this realm. Your entities are some form of extranatural being. Jury's out on how many of those things exist. A deity are gods, goddesses, and divine beings in most practices. The distinction that I make between supernatural and extranatural is because the origin possibilities of deities requires a distinction. If a deity influences a particular space, they are technically part, but not wholly of that that realm that they're interfering with, that they're interacting with, right? So if you have an extranatural entity, there's a good chance that they're interacting with something, but they're not entirely of this. But if they're influencing it in some way, they must be at least in part affecting it. Using extranatural links a deity to nature or the natural itself, so that there isn't just a broad gulf between what is extranatural and it's just floating out there somewhere in the ether. Maybe you're like the Greeks and you just think, oh, the celestials on the outermost ring and we go talk to them sometimes and we could take a ship there or something, right? Like, go for it, man. But it makes sure that we have some connection to that. We're not isolated from that aspect of ourselves. Deities are a common feature in many religions. They vary in where and what they influence and how they're talked about. Often they are part of creation myths. They help outline morals and taboos, or they may act as teachers or guides, or some mixture of all of them. It really varies depending on whatever religion or belief you're working in, right? This framework is essentially the distillation of what a deity fulfills. There are probably many more archetypes that they fulfill, a lot more guidance or things that they might do or as certain facets, because you could also say, oh, the protectors, right? But this is also part of the helping, guide, and teach kind of aspect that I'm talking about. An entity signifies an extranatural being, and those things have to include things like spirits, phantasms, fairies, dragons, ghosts, ancestral spirits, land spirits, etc. This is the entire gamut of extranatural beinghood. If you think it's something that is not human and not animal and it's of a different realm, it is probably an extranatural being of some kind. I'm not going to be able to list all of them here. Do your research as is necessary. Deities, however, seem to me to be an extranatural entity of some kind. Any extranatural entity can be deified, and I will preface this with the idea that I tend to focus on a behavioral lens. So thinking along the lines of Emil Durkheim and behaviorists and that sort of thing, what people do, right? I don't, for me at least, I am not, the jury's still out for me too, because I'm still working through a lot of this myself. I don't particularly work with deities myself, and I don't generally incorporate entities. However, what I suspect is that the extranatural entity that is deified raises to the level of a god, goddess, or divine being by a group consensus often. It can also be a singular one as well. This also includes humans that could be deified, ergo raising to a god or goddess or divine being in that of themselves. Deityhood is a role given by an individual or a group worshipping, venerating that specific extranatural entity. It would be with some regularity and with intent to some purpose, not just flippantly, well, like I'm just going to worship this random thing today. Like there's some regularity to this. The benefits and drawbacks to this, if you're an individual that's worshiping a specific thing, then there's maybe less accountability. It can be a little trickier to kind of engage in that, and you have less support mechanisms for that, less pillars of these stories and teachings and that sort of thing. And that can be challenging in its own self, but it doesn't come with all of the social stuff that comes with being in a group. If it's in a group situation, if you're worshiping consistently a deified extranatural entity of some kind, then you will have this support. You have the stories, the origins, those kinds of things of where they came from, why they're here, what they do for you, what they don't do for you. Which extranatural entity is deified, how many of them, and their purposes wildly vary. There's no real one way that I can figure out how a deity is supposed to act in accordance with a group. It seems to be based on how their correspondences align with the group's focuses. The best succinct way that I can think of that. I referenced a little bit ago about the origins of a deity. Where I get trapped is when we start thinking in like Western scientific thought. And my problem is that I don't know where an extranatural entity is. I don't know if it's in a different realm. I don't know if it exists at all. I don't know if it has a physical existence, and I am not able to discern that, and it just is too far abroad and too big for me to really conceptualize and really just go whole hog and, yep, deities are a thing and they have to be in witchcraft. And that's particularly wise because I can't rationalize what they are, where they are, how many there are, so on and so forth. And I can't make that statement for you. What I can do is I can give you a bunch of information for you to basically freak out about and try to think, how am I going to deal with this information now that I'm asking all these questions of myself and what I believe in? And that's a good thing. Critical thought is important. Supreme beings often incorporate into the cosmogony of religions. Cosmogony is how your universe was created, the origins of the thing, right? How we all got here. It varies. Two ones that I specifically pick up on are really easy. If you're thinking in the Judeo-Christian sort of thought process, you're working with God had made everything in Genesis, do your research on that. If you're looking at Norse Asatru-Ordinic, you're looking at 9 different realms. You're looking about parting out a body of a giant into different realms, and that those are inhabited. This is the cosmogony examples that I have to give you. So cosmogony is not always what a deity is for, but it does tend to play a big role in many major religions of how things came to be, and this gives us a reference point. This should also give you a heads up of why many religions, specifically Abrahamic, have the views they do about why Christianity should be basically, or any Abrahamic religion should be embedded, because their specific perspective is that God made it and it must be worshipped. And there goes all of their teachings and that sort of thing into that framework. And if you're not of that, then it's a problem. Not going to go delve into that very much, but that's a big part of why we have the discrepancies we do, is how we believe, how we got here. And it would be very disturbing if somebody were to tell you, hey, magic's not real. You would be maybe a little grumpy about that. And that's okay, right? It's what you do after that. And if you enforce that on others unwillingly, perhaps may not be the best choice you could make. When you give a cosmogony like that, it provides order and reason to your life, to the group, to the whatever it is you're doing. You can really get into these factions that help you understand and shape your perspectives. But that can also be very limiting and it can be very siloing. I'm going to say a slightly subversive opinion here, but covens, specifically of witches, have some of this problem of siloing. because they have oathbound. I'm saying you shouldn't do oathbound. I'm just saying that if you have an oathbound tradition, what they teach, how they believe, and that sort of thing is going to be in an echo chamber. And there's not a lot of outside input. It is the way it is because of tradition. And I would encourage you to wonder why it needs to be so silenced or why it needs to be oathbound. There's probably some very good merits as to why you would want an oathbound thing. There's reasons for safety. There's reasons for homogeneity, right? There's reasons for it. But it's important to ask why it needs to be that way and then be concerned if it does become silent in an echo chamber. If nothing new is coming in, things are going to get stagnant. That goes for any group, even groups that are public like this. If we don't take in a bunch of information and we don't push ourselves to learn these things as clergy to guide the laity, we're doing a disservice to all of you. And that's its own problem. You should totally hold us accountable for that too. So if we stop learning stuff and we stop trying to teach and provide information, please yell at us gently. Buddhism, as another example, regards supreme beings as goal markers, as far as I understand it. And please feel free to correct me on this in the future too. I know there's a couple of Buddhists that are in here. So these supreme beings are exemplars of what we can do, something to emulate, something to strive for. Not necessarily to copy them, but to provide that leverage and that goalpost for us to have a sort of grip on where we want to go. They can also act as teachers and similarly as guides. They're not saying I'm the only way. Find your path to enlightenment through whatever means you need to, given that framework. They're not deities in that of themselves. And this is why I start getting to the extranatural entity can be deified. I would still classify a supreme being as an extranatural entity, but not necessarily a deity. It's still just as valid. Baphomet, let's talk about that guy. Girl? Question mark. There is a huge amount of ties to witches, alchemists, and other occultist traditions and other esoterica stuff where Baphomet comes into play. We have all heard, if you're a practicing witch or you've been around at all for any stretch of time, witches worship Satan. They errantly call Baphomet Satan, which doesn't actually mean Satan like at all. It's not a thing. It can potentially represent some of the facets that Satan in Christian mythos may represent, possibly even Lucifer. But then you have to accept the fact that the devil and Lucifer actually exist in those kinds of archetypes. I digress. But Baphomet in that of itself is essentially duality and balance. It's bringing together a lot of discordant things, the male, the female, knowing, not knowing. It's, human and animal and bringing those things together. It is this representative. And so is it Satan? Make your own distinctions. But at its core, that's why we get attached to this kind of look, right? We see the devil-headed goat thing and everybody freaks out and go, it's Satan. I don't know why he would take that form exactly. It would make more sense to look like a human to entice us more, just saying. But Baphomet in that of itself is not necessarily satanic, and it's why it represents so many of these different fields and why it gets involved, why that symbol gets involved with witchcraft very frequently. Another example is the Luciferian witches. They don't venerate Baphomet. They're not Satan worshippers. They're Luciferian. They worship Lucifer and the things that the fallen angel represents. They want to emulate what things Lucifer represents. They worship and venerate that. They try to emulate that. Again, another supreme being of some iteration, an extranatural entity enters the fray. It isn't related to a cosmogony. Lucifer didn't make the world. As far as I understand from Luciferian witches that I've encountered, they don't think Lucifer literally made the world, right? But they do emulate and they venerate the qualities that Lucifer has. I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing to be a rabble rouser. Now, I'm downplaying a lot of his story and mythos and that sort of thing, to be fair. But Lucifer being somebody who's a champion for people, a champion of critical thinking, the knowledge, I'm not really mad about some of those things. Can it go off the rails? Yes, any belief can. Absolutely can become zealots and overdone and way blown out of proportion and inappropriate. Absolutely, and that goes for any of them. Another example of non-cosmogon, I can't even say that word. something that doesn't involve cosmogony itself. Theosophy is another one. Madame Blavatsky wrote a lot of those things. Also, F's in the chat for the library that went up in flames in California that had a huge amount of that theosophic literature and rhetoric that existed that no longer exists because it went up in flames. Theosophy incorporates many deities. It accepts that there are multiple deities. It, in that of itself, is not necessarily polytheistic. It's not venerating one of those things. It's an amalgamation of the all, essentially, being represented in multiple frameworks in different deities or extranatural entities. I don't think that they actually have necessarily deities. I just think that they have extranatural entities that they accept as part of the overall extranatural whole. And it's not one specific thing. And again, it's not related to cosmogony. It's about gnosis more than anything else. These kinds of examples support to me that extranatural entities, so venerated, comprise a colloquial deity. We have so many of these extranatural entities, but as we worship and venerate them, they raise to the level of deity and deityhood, which is again why I have problems with deities in my own practice of witchcraft, because I don't have a group that says, oh, we're going to venerate this specific thing. I've got my own trip going on, right? And it is really difficult for me to, I don't dispute any of these. I don't dispute deities as, they're understood in other groups or religions or frameworks. They can absolutely have those. That's fine. For me, it's a little more challenging to accept because of these reasons. Why does any of this actually matter? I talk about these things at length. I was actually dreading, Ember knows this, I was dreading having to try and explain this and put my thoughts out there in the non-siloed world of the internet, because boy howdy, anybody can say anything. And some of these are a little bit difficult to, I'm not even, I'm still working through a lot of these things. But why it matters, why these deities or extranatural entities matter, and those influences. Deification is one such reason. Deified extranatural entities shape social paradigms, and they literally are inferring how someone sees their world. Just like I was talking about Christianity, it is baked into their perspective. And this specifically relates to when I talked about the origin of magic, or what magic is. I referenced it instead of as a hard science, like many ceremonial magicians maybe want to do, but maybe magic in that of itself is really just a perspective versus an actual hard science. And I'm less focused on why it happens and all of the mechanics of how it happens, and just accept as a framework. And this is why it's important to understand that deification of something, incorporating cosmogony, is going to fundamentally change your perspective of how you see things and what you emulate. And even if it's not a cosmogony, if you're deifying Lucifer, you're going to incorporate aspects that are important to how you function as a person, and being very cautious and cognizant of what group you decide to sign up and hitch your wagon to, because this seeps into how you do things insidiously. That the same thing goes for anything that we're teaching here too. Just the exposure alone is going to have some impact on your practices, because it's knowledge. You can't unknow the things in most situations that are extreme. And so it's going to have an impact. And that's the beauty of our knowledge, that we have this kind of rubbing off effect. No matter how hard we try, we can't just not have it. You'd have to silo yourself, and that is way harder to do in such a connected world. Religions are essentially gatherings of like-minded people that are often centered around deified extranatural entities. Not all religions are around deified extranatural entities, not all of them, but many religions are. In a religion of witchcraft, which is, I try to stay away from saying it's the religion of magic, because that's a little too broad, but if we're talking specifically witchcraft, because that's what our church is, that belief has to do with how we get to knowledge, really. And our religion is about a gathering of people who believe in magic, in fundamental reality shifts, in liminal partnering, and those kinds of things. Those are our common held beliefs, of many of them. But that is the thing that binds this religion together. even if it's distinct different systems or traditions, they are fundamentally similar enough that we can classify it at least as a religious sort of experience. That's why don't be scared of church, right? Church is just a group of these people practicing a specific way to believe, right? So church is a place to do the things with people that think like you and believe like you. And that's what we're doing here with witchcraft. I have spoken for hours on all of these facets, so by all means, feel free to go and look at what we believe and what we teach on your own time, and we'd appreciate it. How an extranatural entity or deified extranatural entity is pleased or honored or enticed will shape your praxis. If there's specific things that you're doing for that, let me see here. So if you think about how to entice your deities, all of us do it. I don't know of anybody who doesn't do it. Even though I say, oh, I don't have a deity or whatever, there are things that I'm enticing that I'm trying to bring in, and there are behaviors that come with that. Think about all the times that you light a candle. Why are you lighting it? There's a reason behind your behavior. Why do we make a sacred space? Why do Gardenerians want to incorporate that? Why do so many witches cast a circle? That came from somewhere. There's a belief behind that somewhere. And that is what I'm talking about in terms of how your religion and your deified extranatural entities are shaping your praxis. Something is informing you of what behavior you're doing for some reason and some purpose. Why does the Great Rite exist? Why do we banish things? Why do we call the watchtowers? Any of those things are all part of our praxis and our belief structures. And so, too, are the deified extranatural entities going to provide some of that imperative behavior as well. If you're making offerings or sacrifices, that's going to be something that's enticing. If you're leaving tobacco for Papa Legba, those kinds of things are also part of how you are venerating and worshiping these deified extranatural entities and dramatically shape how what your practice looks like. Social policies construct a framework of belief, of perspective, and of approach. Again, this is that group truth thing that I keep mentioning all the time, that your social policies construct this framework. If we're worshiping in a group and we have this similar religious belief, this fundamental framework, how we believe is being echoed back to us. In my philosophy club, one of them that I used to be a part of, we took exception at the I think therefore I am from Descartes, and we upgraded that for our own meetings, and we said that I am not who I think I am. I am who you think I am. Because whatever I'm doing, you're reflecting back to me, and it's reinforcing what I believe about myself. The same holds true for your religious beliefs. If you're around a bunch of people that are practicing similarly, I don't know, like a whole bunch of witches in a church, they're going to be doing actions and behaviors and that sort of thing for specific reasons. You're doing similar things, and this is a co-instantiated relationship between these two things, reinforcing those beliefs. Ceremonies, rituals, all of those things, rites of passage, all of those are reinforcing how we believe, how we think. And all of our approaches too. We have a relation to those deified extranatural entities in many religions and belief systems. And that reciprocity, that give and take, is shaping much of our behaviors within that, if you're accepting a deified extranatural entity of some kind. It's funny, I actually have this abbreviated as E&E, so I have to remember to say this because I say it so frequently. Now, alternatively, we are going to talk about the agnostic or atheistic witch. Yes, those things exist. You can have extranatural entities and not believe in gods. And this is partly why I had to make deification a part of group and social policy and people individually, because extranatural entities aren't necessarily deities of any kind. An agnostic person generally believes that there is the jury's out, is essentially what it is. So they're saying that it's possible that there are deities. There may be these things that exist. I don't have any direct proof of these. I am broad stroking here, okay? Hang in there with me. Atheistic witches are just straight out the gate. Nope, there's no deities whatsoever. We're not going to deify anything, and that's not a thing. And that's good too. Witches don't have to have a deity. You can take a Gnostic approach or knowledge approach, gnosis, wisdom, that sort of thing, referencing back to Baphomet. That's why he's got the candle over his head. That's the point, is about that knowledge, that inner knowledge. Thelema is also one of those that does that too, that specifies gnosis as their core construct and their belief and their religion around that. And this is why you can deify a human and they could become an extranatural entity because of the reasons of that elevation and honoring the different multicultural approaches, such as Buddhism, when you attain enlightenment, right? These grow you into this sort of extranatural entity. You're not exactly of one or the other. No veneration is possible in witchcraft, but ritualistic and focused on self-development can be the main mode of what you're doing in your belief system within witchcraft. Spells and divination and all of those things are about, for me specifically, about gnosis, about knowing, about that projection of will outward, right? And I don't perceive the need for witches to have a witch god of some kind. There are references to witch gods and witch goddesses and that sort of thing, and that's because a group of people said that's the witch god, and then we went with it. And that's why I say that we're deifying an extranatural entity. Making sense now. You can involve Satanism, Luciferianism, and Thelema because of the focus on self-discovery. This gnosis aspect is their religious belief, their fundamental constructs that they have. Deistic witchcraft or non-deistic witchcraft are just as valid as one or the other. It shapes your approaches dramatically. If I'm doing deified witchcraft, if I'm looking for, goddess and god of some kind, I'm probably going to be looking at natural-based things and looking at those cycles. Maybe I'm working with nature specifically and deifying nature spirits and incorporating those and the cycles of the seasons. And that is going to dictate your practice as you're going forward. What you do in May is going to be different than what you do in December, right? And it's because of those natural cycles that exist. My personal witchcraft is affected by the equinoxes and solstices because of the cycle that happens, and my practice is shaped by that. It's also not deified, but still exists as a fundamental magic construct. The focus or purpose differs, therefore, informing what kind of witchcraft we are engaging with. If you pick up monotheistic or polytheistic or just deistic witchcraft in general, you're going to be practicing something in alignment with that particular deity or deities. If you don't, it's probably going to be more along those Gnostic lines that you're talking about. Examples of our extranatural entities and witchcraft's interpretation. So if we look at various forms of extranatural entities, ancestor worship is one of those. Elemental spirits, guardian spirits, looking at fairies, ghosts, agregors. You might be focused on prayer if you're deifying something. And in prayer, when we're working with spirits, often they are going to contain 3 different types of prayer. That is complaint and question. Why is this happening to me? Whatever have I done? How can I appease you? Right? You're looking at petition. Please do this for me. You are all powerful. Help me do a thing. And intercession. I'm going to pray to a god on behalf of somebody. This gets into ethics. Go look at that sermon later, because should you be doing spells for others without their consent? I don't know, but you should make your own determination. You may be looking at extranatural entities for guidance. How many times have you looked at the 3-in-1? How many times have you invoked Hecate? How many times have you talked about Crone or different archetypes that you're bringing in for guidance and teaching and wisdom? Those things are part of that practice. You're also looking for possibly empowerment from extranatural entities. Alternatively, and even possibly in combination with, you may be looking at gnosis, self-exploration, and shaping reality. Think of the chaos witches and the chaos magicians. They shape their realities based on probability and those kinds of things as sorts of representatives of changing their realities fundamentally. And that is just as much a part of witchcraft as anything else is. Deification is not the only road for a witch's praxis. I say that again because it's important. Deification is not the only road for witches' praxis. So many of them. Don't overlook them. It's important to learn from them too, and why they do the things they do. I've learned a lot about ritual and ceremony from witches that have deities and other groups that have deities, one or many. There is no one defined way, but your way. Your way is the one that matters, the approach that matters in your life. If you connect with a system or tradition, it is by your acceptance. You're accepting that tradition or system. No one else is making you do that. Maybe the deity is, I don't know. And similar approaches will also bring you into possibly a deified sort of system or religious system of that kind, because those things are connected, but you're making that choice of your own accord. And then because you're making that choice, they will often align with what you believe. Happens from time to time. That's why covens exist. It's why certain forms of witchcraft exist. It's why different beliefs exist. If you look at Sabbatic witchcraft versus British traditional witchcraft versus Cardinarian, they're all witches. They all think about it differently, and they all get to it in a different fashion. But some of those systems may fit with you, and if they don't, you can practice on your own, and that's okay. And here at the Church of Witchcraft, you can practice alone together and get feedback on whatever it is you're doing and however you're practicing. Engaging with extranatural entities may be appropriate, and many witches do this, and it's appropriate to their craft. They may be monotheistic or polytheistic. They may be agnostic or atheistic, and a witch determines whatever they're going to do with that. And that's for them to decide. That's not for the Church of Witchcraft to decide, it is for you to determine. We're just going to throw a bunch of information at you and make you think about it and encourage you to do so. Your path or praxis reflects your beliefs and your faith. Belief and faith are a little different. Past sermons will explain this. But your path or praxis is going to change on your beliefs or faith, just like if you're how you venerate, how you worship, what you do, what season you do them in, what day you do them on, all of those things shape your praxis and your path forward. The Church of Witchcraft supports witches in their chosen path. Their chosen path, not our chosen path. I'm making that very distinct here. Our belief, fundamentally, at the Church of Witchcraft is in you. You, the witch. With critical thought is another massive thing that we believe in. We also believe in guidance for witches, all regardless of their beliefs. Whether you're any of these kinds or however you practice your witchcraft, the goal is to support witches in their path and support their critical thinking and provide guidance for them to the best of our abilities. We're not always going to get it right. We also don't have every single piece of information, but we can generally point you in a good direction about whatever it is you're trying to do. We will not support, however, unfounded, unsafe morals or vacant ethics. So if you're just out there to hurt people, we're not going to help you do that. We're not going to tell you a bunch of stuff about that because frankly, it's just not community minded. And in a church, we're community minded, and that's the antithesis of what we're doing. Note that I'm not saying that we can't hex or do anything baneful. I am just saying that there should be a reason and a purpose behind what you're doing and some consideration of why you're using baneful magic. If you're just errantly firing a gun into a crowd, that's not probably the best plan, right? Go with some sort of an idea. Maybe don't wildly shoot into a crowd. That would be appreciated, right? Like, have some sort of idea what you're doing with this before you do it. That's all we're asking. I don't think that's too big of an ask. In conclusion, witches are a diverse religious group, and they're scattered in the liminal, that between state. In our fundamental beliefs about this, witches exist in the liminal. We are so partnered with the liminal. We live on those in-between things, those in-between states, and that can be kind of uncomfortable because you don't know where you're going to land. You don't know what it's going to be, where that polarity shift is going to happen. Reference the Baphomet, if you will. We don't know what that's going to look like, and that can be difficult, especially if you're going on this alone, especially if you're in a siloed group that won't let you learn or expand or encourage your thought. That's a little concerning. And I would be very concerned if somebody was just hanging out and just going, it's okay, just wander around. Don't worry about it. Nope, there's nothing in the shadows. It's fine. It's good. Run. Like, that's not a good place to be. You should have some thought and some caution when you're doing things that you don't know that are unfounded for you. A cohesive, or at least attempting to be cohesive approach unites witches from a dispersion of unmoored practitioners. Witches aren't practicing really in a mass group, right? I have this romantic notion in my brain of, oh, there's this big coven that exists somewhere, and maybe it does. But I'm sorry, if there's a multiple thousands member strong group of witches that are in a coven, where are they in this hyper-connected world? How did you go, how do we miss you? You didn't do anything? We don't hear anything about, nothing's on Facebook, nothing at all. And I'm beginning to be curious about whether or not that's even a possibility. I think you can get really strong groups. I think you can get pretty big groups. But that idea of this romantic, really big coven and this kind of solidified information seems a little more far-fetched, which means that witches are essentially disenfranchised. They're just kind of loose and doing kind of whatever and whatever they can sort of find and grasp. And they put together these really intricate systems that are of varying quality. And then they try to espouse these things. It's why I don't espouse any one direct truth from the Church of Witchcraft. It's why I focus on a lot of the behavior component of this, because I can see what people are doing. Mostly witches are going to practice with an altar or shrine of some kind. Most of them believe in magic. Pretty much all of them do spells, divination of some kind. How they do it, when they do it, what they're doing it for, any of those things vary. But they all do those same things, and at least I can identify that. And so I encourage witches to find those things. So there is some throughput in our own practices as witches, no matter how diverse, which gives us some of that anchoring and brings us back into sort of a cohesive, accepting sort of fold, if you will. And that's really what the Church of Witchcraft is here to do, is to give some sort of mooring and anchor point for witches to be together in a community, but still be true to themselves as witches, because fundamentally, witchcraft is unique. No matter what it is, who it is, however large it is, there's going to be some desire for that community. Our church has and will continue connecting witches to their path. That's fundamentally important. Not our path, to their path, very poignantly. Extranatural entities are one way to practice and also incorporate numerous diverse aspects of culture and belief. Don't just randomly pick up gods and goddesses and just do whatever you're going to do willy-nilly. Please be at least respectful and mindful of these things. Euro-Western witchcraft is the dominating force. That is true, and it's primarily because of access and a whole bunch of other really complicated social things that are going on, but they're the most accessible. And so we talk about that a lot, but witchcraft exists beyond and outside of Euro-Western sort of belief. There are plenty of other magic users that exist and other people that fulfill that sort of loose definition we have about what witches are and what they do. And it's not just a Euro-West phenomenon. There's a reason that that happened. But again, if you're practicing with a deity of some kind, one or many, just be respectful and considerate of what you're doing and why you're doing it, because some of it may not be appropriate as a connection point for you. Deities can be a bridge to the liminal. As I've said, witches partner with the liminal state in that of itself. Deities can help you get there. So can extranatural entities. So can your own transcendental state of self-gnosis. These three things may work in conjunction. You may pick one or a mixture of them. This sustains your praxis. What you believe in, how you believe, what you connect to, it sustains what you're doing in your witchcraft. And this is why I think a lot of witches just get burnt out. They just kind of fade, right? They're like, I'm going to be a witch. I pick up the blue book. I pick up the red book. I do some Gardnerian. Maybe I go pick up some OBD. Cool. And now what? You don't know. There's nothing that binds your practice together. There's no reason. There's no tether. And so it just fades because there's no community, there's no group, and let's not let that be the case, right? Let's encourage that learning, that witchcraft, that magic that these people are doing, and that's what we're here and about. They may provide a fundamental philosophical grounding to these deities. If you're doing this, it may provide some philosophical direction for you. Your morals, your values, ethics, all of that stuff may help you. And it also might be part of the societal policy. So if deities are your way to go, sweet. Be sure you believe in those ethics and you really jive with it, because it can get really twisted really fast. See the Crusades. It was messy and not great. Determining and shaping your praxis is our religious right to witchcraft. It establishes and connects demonology in all of its complexities. Not just my demonology being really the study of wisdom, and it's the in place of theology. There is no such thing as demonology until I put it together and I wrote a whole bunch of stuff. And then it existed. And it was about finding your orthodoxy, your orthopraxy, and what that looks like. Much like I was talking about the various things that pretty much every witch does, that's in there. But also in there is things that have to do, for clergy specifically, that have to do with what are you going to do about counseling and guiding people with your witchcraft. What do they do when they have a difficult situation in their life? Well, pick up some astrology, right? We can talk about that. But that is really important for us to do. And demonology helps us bind that together. Find what yours is for you. What we do may be helpful to you, and it may be the system or tradition you want to use. But it's important that these things can bind together what your witchcraft is. Whether it's deified or non-deified, put something together. Go in a direction so it doesn't just fade away. And that's what communities are for. It's what the church is for. It's what all the clergy are doing, is trying to incorporate and capture these distinct practices. Specifically, when you're talking anybody who's entering into the priest-ex grouping in our church, they have to define their own practice. What is it? What do you believe in? Because they can tell how other people now, how they did it, how they got there for them. And it may resonate with them, and maybe they pick up the same thing the priestess did. Or maybe they come up with something different. Myself, the celestial witchcraft, I had to write it. It's a very long story, but a majority of what came out of that was reflected in anthropological sources that I didn't even know were there. And so that meant I think I hit on something. Because if I'm coming up with the same thing that somebody a bunch of years ago also did independently and not knowing that source of information, I'm probably on the right track, is my thinking, right? And so similarly, I look towards those things and I encourage others to look at those sources themselves. From that, like I said, don't let this magic fade away. Don't just let your witchcraft just vanish into the ether. Keep pushing forward. Keep putting together those answers for yourself. Figure out what that is and really sit with it and what it means for you. It's taken me decades to get to where I'm at with the witchcraft that I have. Not saying it's going to take you that long. I didn't have a lot of help. I was just picking up random books and trying it out. And then I ended up here, but that took a lot of reading, and I can shortcut you through a lot of that headache because I can synthesize all this information down and translate it to laity so that witchcraft may continue. Hence why the Church of Witchcraft revitalizes witchcraft under a flexible common practice. That's its purpose, fundamentally.